Jewel as the intro song.
I love it. Well, we are going live on Facebook too. I am Gina Anderson Cohen. We've got Julie Smolyansky, who you were just hearing from. She's the CEO of Lifeway Foods. We've got Alia Dalal. She's a healthy living chef. But before we jump in, this is a Sweat Life digital event. We are in a digital world, as you know, but at everything we do at a Sweat Life, we like to try new things and meet new people. A lot of what you'll be doing to meet people will be in sort of the digital comments. I want you guys to remember that you're gonna have a chance to ask a lot of questions at the end. I'm gonna be asking a lot of the questions in the upfront, but at the end, you'll have a hefty sort of Q&A session. So either ask your question in the chat as you think of it, and then I'll call on you to come off mute and ask your question with your voice, or you can kind of raise your hand towards the end and let me know you have a question. We'll let you come off mute, but I'm really excited to hear from you guys. Before we jump in, I want to remind you that the topic tonight is going with your gut. If you are just getting here and you're being admitted, remember, say hello in the chat, say who you are and where you're calling in from or videoing in from. But the topic tonight is going with your gut. We're talking about that from two sort of angles: your actual gut health, like the microbiome, etc., and your intuition, which is why if you heard, we played that Jewel song, Intuition, as you entered the room. Huge thank you to Lifeway Kefir for being a partner, a friend, a sponsor for the entire week. So everybody, please clap it up for Lifeway Kefir. Thank you, Julie and team. So let's kick it off. You guys ready for a healthy discussion on the gut?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah,
let's do it. So my first of all, I could try to introduce Julie and Alia, but you guys know a lot about who you are. So I'd love to hear from you in your own words, who you are, what you're working on, and what the gut means to you. Let's start with Julie.
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks for having me, first of all. This is so fun. What a interesting way to, like we were talking earlier, adapt to the situation and sort of, you know, keep going forward and keep doing what we're, you know, all here to do, which is, you know, live our life to the best of our capacity. Well, you know, the gut is something that I have spent my entire career learning about. I have grown up with my parents who were founders of Lifeway Foods, and over 33 years ago, we were immigrants from the former Soviet Union. We were actually refugees, and we settled in Chicago in 1976 when I was just one. And my parents, you know, escaped communism and breadlines and scarcity and came to the United States for opportunity. But one thing that, you know, was really passed down to me was these stories of breadlines and food scarcity and food insecurity. But one thing that they always had was kefir, and it was a staple in our community, you know, through our ancestors. It's something that our, you know, great grandmothers and their great grandmothers used as a staple, as part of their survival and their existence. And there's so much great folklore associated with kefir, and these people who consumed it in the Caucasus Mountains, the regions where, you know, my ancestors were from, they lived past 100 years of age. And you know, they attributed their longevity to their consumption of kefir. And today, modern science has really backed up what my ancestors kind of believed intuitively in their gut, no pun intended, but they thought that kefir, or pun intended, they believed that kefir really helped them live past 100 years of age, and that they used it medicinally. And, you know, it survived and stood the test of time. It survived war, famine, and, you know, it's really storied, and there's a lot of folklore around it. And it was originally you know, used from a standpoint of like medicinally, you know, anecdotally, you know, just passed down word of mouth, generation to generation. And these really great healing benefits became studied originally about 100 years ago by a zoologist named Elie Metchnikoff. And oh my God, my dog is drinking my, hold on, guys. I actually made a kefir, a pina colada thing. And my dog wanted to just drink it, so I had to take it away. Sorry, this is a dairy-free one, actually. And hold on, I'll just show you what I'm drinking. There's this rum from one of my trips. Oh, from St. Martin. Amazing. It's like, if you can't go there, drink your rum, all of your souvenir rum. And then my Plentiful, our dairy-free version. We'll talk about that. But anyways, cheers before I keep talking too far.
The dog drinks it.
It's so good. But anyways, so, you know, so my ancestors really just, they used kefir medicinally like this. And the Elie Metchnikoff, he really started studying scientifically what the fermentation process does to the human body. And originally he was a zoologist, and so he had access to all of these animals. So he started his original studies on the animals, and then, you know, that led to the studies on humans. But it's really fascinating research. And he really was like the grandfather of immunity. And he was kind of the first to show that the benefits of lactic acid really contributed to well-being and longevity and health. And so upon that 100 years, on these hundreds of years, a lot of research has backed all of this up. But I think like this intuition and following gut, it became, so when my parents immigrated here, what they saw was that there was a lot of food in the United States, but they didn't have kefir here. And so they, again, continued to follow their gut and follow their intuition and make brave, fearless choices, and started Lifeway with, you know, $116. And I mean, my mom learned English watching General Hospital. I think, you know, in terms of like following your gut, like my family is a really good example of that. And that even in really challenging times, and times when you think that you can't see the ground beneath you, or you feel like you're in some crisis, that there are, you know, brighter days, and there are nice sunsets and sunrises, and that will continue to happen. And I don't know, I feel like there's a lot there beyond just gut health, right?
Yeah.
It's following your gut, making healthy choices, making choices in uncertainty, making choices that are best for your family. So yeah. So, you know, we've been running, like when Lifeway started, it was this idea to bring to the United States this product and teach people about it, and talk about probiotics, which for us, because of a lack of a medical model, we listen to, you know, these old grandmother healing techniques. And I think like now more than ever, we want that. We want to return to those anecdotes that in our gut we know about. You know, yeah. We know how to heal ourselves. We know primally like how to do that.
Yeah. And I have a lot of questions about your family and your family business. But before we jump in, Alia, tell us who you are, what you do, and what the gut means to you.
Sure. So thanks for inviting me to join. I definitely see some familiar faces in the chat. So some of you guys have met me. My name is Chef Alia Dalal. I am a health and wellness focused chef here in Chicago. So what that means is I have a background both in nutrition, but also culinary. So I went to a culinary school where you studied both. There's very few programs like that. Really, because my passion was more food and health. So I definitely found my people with a Sweat Life. But I really became interested in cooking professionally and food and health a few years after college. My degree is in something totally unrelated. But actually, like right after college, I had a good friend who spent a lot of time in the hospital. And going to visit her there, my parents are both in medicine. My mom's a nurse, my dad's a pharmacist. And so, had been in a lot of hospitals and was very, oh, you have a minor cold, let's go to the doctor. Was just very comfortable and familiar with that model, and sort of visiting her as like a young adult and just seeing the garbage food that she was being fed there, in a place where she was really supposed to be becoming more healthy. Like, it was just this big moment of dissonance for me, where I was like, wait, shouldn't this be like the best food? Like, why does she have this weird sugary jello and like this stuff? And just was sort of this like moment for me, combined with the fact that then when I was in college, and some of you guys have heard this, that I studied abroad in India. My family heritage is Indian Pakistani. So actually, I feel like, Julie, we have some connections of a lot of the things I kind of learned later in life really come from my culture of heritage, like things about traditional medicines and foods that were really lost in American culture. And really grew interested in the practice of Ayurveda there. So that's, I always, if no one's heard of it, I always describe it as like, what traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture and all that is to China, that's what Ayurveda is to India. So it's more of a traditional holistic healing system. But when I was in South India, in Kerala, I mean, if you get sick, you can see a traditional doctor, or you can see an Ayurvedic doctor, and both doctors go to a medical school. It's just a slightly different practice. But really the two main modalities of healing in Ayurveda are food and herbs and massage. And so this whole area of like what you eat and how often you're eating and taking these herbs, and like just the fact that this was so important. You might be consuming special herbs 10 times a day, or you go see a doctor for a cold and you might spend an hour with that person talking about your emotions and your family and the food that you eat and the weather and all of that stuff, was just really mind-opening to me. So then when I became a chef, really tried to bring a lot of that holistic practice to what I do. So when I talk about, food and gut health, I do have some scientific knowledge. I definitely won't be the expert in this conversation. But if you guys do have kind of questions along that, I can do my best to answer, but really more of what I'm an expert in and have been doing for the past 10 years is helping people implement those type of changes. So not just, explaining maybe the nitty gritty of what's going on in your microbiome, but okay, so you've heard about these foods. How do you eat them? When do you eat them? How do you prepare them? This food that someone says is really good for you, but makes your stomach feel, terrible and bloated, like really just working with people in that capacity. And then as I developed, became really interested in this relationship between the gut, the microbiome, and immunity. But lately I've actually been really interested in the relationship between like the gut and emotions, mental health, and even chronic pain. I know maybe we'll get into that a little bit later in the conversation, but it's kind of where my head's at now. And we definitely don't have all the answers, but it's something I'm just very curious about as well.
Yeah, I love that. I know that connection is so strong. And so I have some questions for both Julie and for Alia, but I want both of you to feel free to sort of chime in on each other. Julie, I've heard your family's story before, your story before. I'm going to hit send on this message, but you've been on a Sweat Life's podcast. We got goals in the past. And you shared the story there, as well as many other places, about your father's passing and you taking over Lifeway Kefir at 27, making you the youngest female CEO of a publicly traded company, which you are still the CEO of today, almost 2 decades later. Can you talk about your parents' influence? Both of your parents were entrepreneurs, and how you had to really trust yourself in those first couple of years as you led the company.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, well, it's been a very long journey, but yeah, I mean, my parents both were very entrepreneurial. Again, food was so critical in their lives. Um, my mother really told me of stories about when she really almost remembered dying first from starvation in the Soviet Union, and how important and critical food was to them. And my grandmother survived the Holocaust, and my great grandmother was murdered in the Holocaust. So these stories of survival and food and scarcity and healing just were really a part of the DNA in our family. And 2 years after settling here in Chicago, my mom realized that while there's ample food in the US, it's different than her Slavic food. That led to her opening the first Russian deli in Chicago. And then that led to 5 more delis. And that ultimately led to an importing and distributing food business. And while they were in Germany on this food buying show, my dad was able to buy 3 quarts of kefir there in Europe. That was like the light went off in his head, and he said, "Oh, America has everything, but it doesn't have kefir." And my mom said, "Well, you're an engineer. Why don't you build a plant and I'll sell it through my distribution?" And 6 months later, they incorporated the business. They weren't waiting for fancy logos or business plans. I mean, it was so scrappy, so bootstrapped. It still is that way, I think. But, and so I was 11 when they started the business, but I grew up in the food business. I mean, I talk about the groceries. I ran my first demo when I was 11 years old. I attended my first trade show when I was 12. Like, I am really comfortable behind the counter in the stock room. I was putting prices on, Sprats and, jam and all sorts of really, really off the wall food. Nutella. My mother was the first to import Nutella into the United States, you guys.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
What a gift.
Yes, I know. Thank you to your mother.
I know. It's crazy. Yeah. And this was crazy. Again, it's like these funny ways of following your gut or trusting your instinct. But when we were in exile, we lived in Rome for 3 months when I was a baby. And that was the first time she had tried Nutella. These shop owners would come out and they would see this poor young refugee family and they would just give her Nutella to try. And so she, all of these, the path of the refugees from the Soviet Union and immigration from the 80s and 90s all came through Italy. And so my mom just said, everyone's going to go down the same path and they're going to try Nutella. And when they're going to come to the US, they're going to see that there is no Nutella here. So she started to import the first cases for these immigrants and refugees for whom she trailblazed. Anyway, so they start Lifeway, and my dad decides to take the company public 2 years after starting it because there was such a demand for this product. And I'll give you context because everyone's probably really young, but in 1988, this was, and in the mid 80s, Gorbachev and Reagan were having their peace talks. And some word started to get out that there was this crazy Soviet immigrant who started this business based on this Russian mythical healing beverage called kefir. And so one day the White House called my father and said, Ronald Reagan is going to meet Gorbachev, and we heard that you were doing this business of kefir. It's a product from the Soviet Union. We'd like to bring it to Gorbachev to show him what his immigrants were doing in our country in the US. So my dad sent a case over, and they sent us a nice letter. And so I always think we were part of the peace process. But, originally like Time Magazine wrote about it and media sort of got word of it. And the company just blew up. Like it was more than he could ever expect. And he needed capital. And so somebody said, well, Mike, you should go public. And so he said, all right, well, fine, let's do it. And the day that he was supposed to go public, it was, in 1988 when the stock market crashed. Mm. And I think our revenues were about $600,000 at the time. And, you know, today we're like 95 million. We've gone as high as 130 million, or, you know, so, you know, vacillates in that range. But like, you know, I tell that story just for people who are feeling challenged right now and feeling like, you know, how they are very unsure of what the future holds. And I would just encourage folks to like think about the long-term projective nature of human ingenuity, recovery, you know, adaptability, market opportunities. Like there are so many things, like, and just to remember that this moment is a moment, and that the, you know, that you can get through this.
Yeah, I love, yeah, I love every element of that story. I think what was incredible is every piece of your parents just sort of leaning into what their intuition was telling them. Your mom with the Nutella, your dad with going public, and inevitably actually going public. It's just interesting how much your gut does determine your business. And to shift gears to Alia, I know you sort of listened to your own gut when you were starting to study nutrition, I should say, and culinary. And now today you're helping people to sort of heal their bodies through food. Can you talk a little bit about how you sort of advise people to heal their guts with the food they're eating?
Sure. So just to emphasize too that I'm not a medical professional. So typically, you know, the way I work with people is kind of at least like a 3-pronged process. You know, usually come to me because maybe they're under the advice of a doctor, a dietitian, or, you know, TCM practitioner, et cetera. I might come in with this sort of practical implementation piece, because food isn't just about, you know, inputs and outputs. I feel like that's sort of the old fitness model, right? Where it's like, have my, you know, Tupperware chicken, and then, you know, my body is going to work perfectly like this. That's not the way things work. You know, modify and adapt a lot of those recommendations for the individual person, making sure it's appropriate for their culture, it works for their lifestyle, everything like that. And then the third prong is always going to be that person, because you really can't outsource your health completely like that. Even just relating to what you're talking about with intuition. You know, especially when it comes to gut health, you know, some of the biggest questions I get are people asking me about like, well, you know, I've been trying to eat all these beans because, you know, they're so healthy, but like I feel terrible. Or, you know, people said, you know, not to eat dairy, but I feel fine when I eat dairy. And I feel like sometimes we have to be careful about the information that we get, because it can almost teach you to negate what you know about your body. That yes, beans might be healthy, but there are certain reasons why certain people and certain times and certain recipes don't work for people. And it's just funny how we can be so distanced from that. I think I'm someone who was lucky to be raised I actually ate really unhealthily growing up. We ate tons of processed foods, and people are always like, oh, does your family cook? I'm like, no, my family doesn't cook. I'm the only one that cooks. But there was never any talk in my family about dieting, about, you know, not deserving to eat this or losing weight. Yes, we were eating processed garbage, but I think I have and had just a strong sense of, you know, when I'm hungry and when I'm not. And I think so many of us have really moved away from that, you know, maybe no fault of your own. I've been surprised. I feel like most of my friends were actually raised with some sort of disordered messaging, whether they got it at home or from the media or just other people pushing that expectation on you. That I think, you know, kind of getting back to basics and just learning, hey, you know, am I hungry or not? Does this make me feel good or not? Do I enjoy the taste of this? If I change something, would I enjoy the taste of it more? So often that's kind of what I bring when I'm working with someone. And then a lot of the ways I work with people are more in like class settings. So really I just try, one of the reasons I became a chef and not a, you know, master's in public health or a hospital dietitian is like, I want to make things fun and actionable, and it can be super interesting to have a lecture on you know, healthy bacteria, but like how much cooler is it to, make yogurt in your own kitchen, or put some kimchi on some breakfast tacos. And so I just try to find those moments and kind of bring that into things on gut health. But yeah, a lot of what I do is, I do have some kind of tips that maybe we can pop in to the conversation later for anyone who is looking for, maybe some things to change. But I feel like my biggest piece of advice is like, number one, to really just start listening to your body in just like a really practical sense, and I think hunger is a good thing to focus on, because I think a lot of us really don't know when we're hungry or not. And then two, like, how do you feel before, after, and during eating? And those will kind of give you some starting points on where to go.
That's intuitive eating, and we're talking a lot about intuition. So I love just listening to yourself in general, listening to the hunger cues, listening to your brain and its connection to your gut too. So I think that's a perfect jumping off point. I chatted the link to our last podcast episode with Julie. You'll hear from her again on a Sweat Lives podcast this week. But last time you were on, Julie, you told this incredible story about how you sort of relearned to trust your intuition when you lost your phone for a few days in Mexico. What I think was powerful about that story is that it sort of plays into the deep connection we all have to technology right now, especially right at this moment. And it's sort of interruption of our ability to feel our own cues and the cues from the world around us. So before I talk forever about this and why it's powerful, can you talk to me about how you've learned, Julie, to listen to your intuition over the years, and maybe talk a little bit more about that powerful incident in Mexico?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's an ongoing process and a learning that is, not always perfect. And I always say that we need to have compassion with ourselves in this, because it's not, I'm speaking, but I struggle with this as much as the next person. I think what you're talking about is mindfulness and boundaries to some extent, and knowing where yours are and where the rest of the world is, and, being connected to our food, being thoughtful, being present. These are all kind of things that are ongoing practices that are not, it takes effort to do it. It's so easy to numb out, zone out into a show or a movie and just sit and, eat without really consciously thinking about your ingredients, or, but I actually think that what this moment is that we're living through, and kind of what I kind of experienced was a pause and a moment of being present and having faith that this too shall pass, or that we'll survive. That in that moment when I lost my phone, honestly, it was so devastating. It was, to your point, our technology is our greatest connection to the outside world. And all of a sudden in that moment, every person that I knew, every attachment that I had, was all in my phone. And I knew that I did not have anything backed up, because I am really bad with technology. So I knew that all of these pictures, all these moments that I was digitally hoarding in my phone all disappeared, and I knew I was not going to get them back. And I tried, and it was just devastating. I thought I was in total crisis. And I mean, I had to rationalize it, and I had to calm myself down, and I had to meditate. I sat for 2 hours in the sand meditating and talking myself off a ledge in the middle of the night. And ultimately what I just discovered was that, all these really kind of profound thoughts about my life kind of came to me. And it was a moment that I just had been go. I really didn't even have time to process a lot of things about my life. And all of a sudden, in this moment where the technology was gone, I felt like I was in a crisis of some sort, and I had to I don't know, like a couple of days of without any digital stuff. I had a pen and a paper, and I was able to, I don't know, sort of come to terms with some things, and it was very powerful. But, you know, today, I think what we are trying to, you know, at least I am trying to lean into a presence and a gratitude towards the really simple things that, you know, I want to enjoy every moment that I have on this earth, even in a global pandemic. Like, I would like to try to, you know, make lemonade out of whatever that moment is. And now more than ever, you know, just take comfort in watching a sunset as I'm watching right now. It's really beautiful lighting. Or just, you know, seeing the spring awakening and the rebirth happening that we know happens always every year. And that's really beautiful. I was like watching the magnolias all around my home and in my neighbor's trees just every day. Like, these little buds are opening up, and it's so inspiring. And it's those little simple moments, the same way that you can enjoy you know, breakfast with, you know, with like one of my product, whatever I'm having, or a cocktail like that we just made, and just enjoying that it doesn't always have to be that we're running, you know, with the FOMO, you know, and just taking comfort in the most simple moments. And that too becomes something really wonderful. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's kind of what I think about, is just this idea of being mindful of our ingredients, being mindful of our process, being mindful of supply chain, having gratitude for the people who grow our food, who, you know, transport it, who stock our grocery shelves so that all of us can have it. Like, I think it's a mindfulness that we really never kind of thought about. And I guess, like, just growing up in the food industry and seeing how my parents kind of, the importance that they placed on supply chain. Mm-hmm. I find it like really inspirational right now, as it feels like a little bit like the rest of the world is sort of learning a little bit about that. And it's great.
Yeah, we definitely have a heightened awareness of how our food gets to us and the people who have to be involved in it. And if we pick up prepared food at the store, like, how many people touch it before we eat it? How many trucks did it have to travel on? And it also sounds like your sort of mindfulness practice gave you gratitude, or gives you gratitude. Alia, do you have anything to add on mindfulness and gratitude?
I mean, it's all good stuff. I think, you know, I think it's like a good, I'm a chef, so I'm always sort of rooted in a lot of like the practical practices. But the cool thing about food is, especially if maybe you're not one of like the woo-woo people and talking about like having a gratitude journal. And I mean, I know we're in a safe space here where probably most of us have done things like that. But food in general is a great way to like introduce someone to the idea of mindfulness. So maybe this is someone, you know, in your life, or even a child. But I think like a great example of teaching mindfulness is like having a single piece of dark chocolate, you know, and putting it in your mouth and kind of letting it melt. A lot of times we ignore food when we're eating it. But like Julie was saying, you know, that morning cup of tea or your breakfast, like sometimes we do remember to have those nice moments with it. So I think if you're trying to train yourself to be more mindful, you know, just have a piece of dark chocolate every day. But it's honestly food. A tea is a big one for me too, that, you know, I heard an herbalist once call her herbal teas like a hug in a mug. And for me, like, that's my slow down beverage too, because it's too hot. You can't chug it down. You're not drinking it the way you drink coffee. So I think food can actually be a really good way to bring that practice into your life. Or if you have kids, you know, like that's a really great example of how you can teach them to pay attention to their senses, which like for me in yoga class is so hard. I'm like, I can hear that girl breathing. Like, I need something to focus on. So food can be great for that.
Yeah, no, it's so funny because I really learned the most about mindfulness from my friend, Katrina Markov, who's the founder of Vosges Chocolate. And she does this amazing chocolate ceremony. If you ever have a chance to Zoom with Katrina, she's amazing. And she could take you through this mindfulness chocolate cocoa experience. But her dark chocolate is like, I'm living on it during this pandemic, because I know it's like antioxidants and great phytonutrients and awesome, like there's immunity benefits there, but it is, yeah, you don't really need that much. And what you realize is when you have that simple one piece and you're just mindful of it, it's surprising how much that does for your senses. You don't need to eat the whole bar. And that's like that, the learning those boundaries, I think, is what we are talking about, you know, and the self-care, which I think is so important. But I love that we can make some of our favorite foods something that we can feel good about eating, not, you know, the deprivation. I think we sort of started talking earlier about, you know, the disordered eating and kind of the mixed messages that you get from like media or culture or whatever. I feel like that was like really rough messages in the 80s and 90s about deprivation and diet food and fat free. And, you know, today the message is so much more, I think, positive and wholesome and restorative. It's about what can I bring into my body and into my life that works for me? What can I include? Which functional ingredients can I include into my life that work for me and help me fuel, you know, my next big thing, whatever, fuel my wellness, fuel whatever your goals are. I mean, they're all individual for us, but I think that's what's really encouraging and inspiring too, that today's message is not about don't eat this, don't eat this. It's like, you can have a little bit of everything and balance and like find what works for you, listen to your body, you know, have that gut health that helps you know what works for you. Because if you're just like numbed out, you won't even know it feels good. And not depriving yourself. Like, what can we add in? What is it? Is it green tea? Is it carrots? Is it apples? Is it chia seeds? Is it flaxseed? Is it, you know, collagen? Is it a combination of both? Is it one day you're vegan, tomorrow, you know, another day you're not, you know, you're flexitarian. It's just, it's like what works for you to get you through this situation and adapt to, you know, when like, for example, when I'm running or, you know, training for a marathon, I'll eat differently than when I'm not, or, you know, when I'm on the go or whatever. So, yeah, really like listening to that gut feeling, I guess, and knowing what works for you is just so key, I think.
Yeah. So I'm going to switch us over to some science. Speaking of the gut, I'm going to read a little bit of scientific research. We'll call this the Harvard section of the talk, of the panel. So I'm going to, pardon me while I read so I get the studies right. And then we'll, after these couple of questions, we'll go right to Q&A. So gather your questions. So according to Harvard Health Publishing, a person's stomach or intestinal distress can be the cause or the product of anxiety, stress, or depression. That's because the brain and the gastrointestinal system are intimately connected. So we've known that for a long time, but science is linking those things up. So Julie, you talked about experiencing physical pain based on what's happening in the brain. Can you talk more about what you experienced and how that kind of left you? And I know Alia had an experience like this too.
Yeah, well, you know, actually right now we're learning that the gut and the brain are totally connected, and that the mind and gut are constantly in communication, that there's a mind-gut axis connection. And oftentimes in the, you know, moments of anxiety, kind of think about butterflies in your stomach, or when you're about to give a big report or speech, or, you know, whatever, interact with somebody that you are, you know, have a crush on, whatever. Those moments bring about anxiety or kind of a gut response. or in moments of stress and panic and crisis, also the cortisol and the chemical reactions in your body that elevate your stress response just get activated. And very often, most often, we notice that response includes a gastrointestinal distress. And I think a lot of it is sort of sometimes mimicked as like various, autoimmune diseases or, irritable bowel syndrome or, name one of these autoimmune diseases. But I think a lot of times it is sort of undiagnosed trauma response that might be, coming into play. We're in the study that you're referring to, these scientists discovered that when people consumed, kefir, that they actually were able to manipulate their serotonin levels and decrease levels of stress, depression, and anxiety, that people actually reported a feeling and sense of well-being, and that they felt that they were in control of their health care. So it's very powerful. And, we are now even learning that the mental health suffering is as great as the pain that we physically feel if we physically hurt ourselves. That, this brain health is an organ that is as important and often has been forgotten for a variety of reasons, stigma, all sorts of reasons why, mental health has sort of been ignored, but we have learned a lot about it in recent years, and we'll continue to learn about it. The microbiome is just so powerful. We haven't scratched the surface, but yeah, it's really, really powerful stuff.
Yeah, just to add to that, I 100% agree. And I feel like almost like the first half of my career was really thinking about how, the gut might affect the mind. Okay, if you're eating, a ton of caffeine and sugar and, refined carbohydrates, it's going to be really hard for you to have stable emotions. Your food is going to create your hormones. And so a lot of it was really focusing on, what you eat, sort of becoming your body, becoming your thoughts. And I feel like what's been really interesting to me lately is the second half of that two-way street that Julie was just mentioning, how much your brain really controls, every part of your body, but down to your gut and down even to the bacteria and microbes in your gut. When I first started learning about the microbiome, which is just the sort of the general term used for microbes, bacteria, all that stuff, not just in your gut, but on your skin, there's significantly more bacteria that is on you, in you, a part of you than your actual human cells. So a couple of people actually, even in the food space, I'll give you guys some names and some books and stuff as we go, but there's a really awesome fermentation author, Sandor Katz, who a lot of people in the food space know. I was gonna say, I'm sure Julie has books. There's one book that I have called Wild Fermentation, and then another one, The Art of Fermentation. Yeah, it's like the Bible for fermentation. But he talks a lot about a coevolution of humans and bacteria really evolving together, that it's not, hey, we were living and just decided to make random foods like kefir, but those bacteria, we kind of needed each other to progress, which is really interesting. Sort of my personal experience with this phenomenon happened a couple of years ago, and it's something I'm kind of sharing as just personal experience. I feel like maybe there's going to be a couple people here who are curious about it or identify with it. It's definitely not meant to be a how-to or, oh, this must be what's going on with you too. But a couple of years ago, I really started experiencing very strong chronic pain. So actually for me, nothing to do with my gut, but just really strong burning pain in my leg and my back, and kind of did the thing where, you see every doctor, you see, surgeons and physical therapists and all this stuff. And, everyone was diagnosing me with something different. But none of the treatments really helped my pain. And in sort of the last like 6 to 8 months, really became introduced to this concept of, which to me as such a practical person sounds so crazy, but physical pain really having an emotional or a neurological root. And I think for a lot of people who've experienced chronic pain, and this could include like some chronic digestive disorders, that idea is initially like almost kind of insulting, because physical pain, like there's nothing more real and physical than it. So someone being like, oh, it's, in your head is like sort of the most offensive thing that someone can say to you. But really when I began to learn more about it, I mean, all pain is in our head to an extent, right? Like the brain is where, you feel pain, you understand pain, you receive pain. So no matter what, if you get a giant cut in your arm, if you didn't have a brain, you wouldn't feel any pain. So part of it, it's actually not really like the craziest or the most far-fetched idea. But some examples that I kind of learned about that helped me understand it a little bit better is the idea that, when maybe you have like some kind of chronic injury, or if you're running a lot or something, or you have an injury, your brain kind of develops a neural pathway to kind of continuously keep sending that pain signal. And now what I believe, and sort of have seen some people who've maybe confirmed that, is at some point I had, an acute injury, but that neural pathway was really developed. So once my body healed, I just kept getting the pain signal. And basically the more I've kind of like dove deep into this world, is that for some people who do have like those like really unexplainable kind of come and go digestive issues, so not something where you know what it is, you have a treatment, the treatment works for you, but when you're like, well, sometimes it's this, and this doctor told me one thing, this doctor told me another thing, and just none of it feels right. It's something that I would just maybe suggest of like looking into. So a couple terms that you could research. There's actually an amazing app called Curable. I think they're actually Chicago based, but they were just a really great source of information for me. There's a therapist who I now listen to her podcast, called The Cure for Chronic Pain. But if you just kind of put your feelers out there, it's something that's just, it's fascinating to me right now. And I hope I kind of did it justice and a little overview. But really, like exactly what was Julie talking about, we've all had that upset stomach feeling when you're nervous. And something like that, can really develop into a chronic thing. And so if you're just looking, hey, is it gluten that I need to cut out? Think about maybe the other foods that you're feeding yourself, your social environment, your family, your beliefs about the world. And I think that's sort of been my biggest one, is sort of those belief systems of, do you believe that you can heal and feel better, or do you not believe that? And in my head, I'm not the type of person who would be drawn to this type of stuff, but there's tons of research behind it. It really seems to be where kind of chronic pain and neurology research is going. So something to look into for people, especially like IBS is often one that kind of pops up, because it's not something that really, it's more of a collection of symptoms. It's not really like cause, effect, cure type of disease. So I did want to just kind of mention that.
Yeah. So true. So true. And I think another piece of it is just like even knowing that in so many cases in the world and in life, it feels like there are not choices for how things might go down, let's say. And I think at least with this, that as the search for self-care and healing becomes actually fun in and of itself. And it's fun to kind of dabble and kind of create a masterpiece that works for yourself, and to know what feels good. And then also being able to adapt. I mean, for me, being able to work out and sweat and move my body is important. I have like my favorite ways, but like in this time we have to adapt and I have to do something different. But, I'm not going to give it up. I know that I need it. I know like what works for me. I know the kinds of foods, and it is, I think, not about like the survival idea is not about who's the smartest or who has the most money or who has, it is about who can adapt to the current situation. And that's what we're being asked to do right now, and find new ways of making, you know, healing work for us. You know, more baths in my own house, you know, more, I don't know, I went out and got the Theragun thing because I can't get my massages, or, you know, the various ingredients that make me feel good, that are, whether that's indulgent and it's like, you know, my banana bread, or something else, you know, and having compassion for ourselves in that whole process and journey. But I think it becomes like a fun masterpiece of rituals, and that the process of like the ritual is sort of nice, and something that, again, also something you can kind of lean into for a predictability and a choice, and knowing that you have some sort of control over your day-to-day and over your hour. And it's about, you know, how you speak to yourself, what you say to yourself, how you rest your body, how you allow yourself to love yourself right now, and not just now, but always, really.
Yeah. And I think we've talked a lot about self-love and self-care, and it's funny because it feels soft, but it's not in this time. It feeds into your mentality and your gut health in general. I want to make sure we do take the questions in the comments here. We're going to go probably 5 minutes over, my friends on the stream. So let's start with Nicholas. And Alia, I know you have some tips for actionable gut health eating, so you'll probably want to toss those in now or soon. But how does joy factor into eating? Big question.
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, to me, that's what it's all about. It's like, especially when it comes to health, my perspective, which some people may disagree with, but health to me is not a goal in and of itself. Like what, you know, I'm going to be healthier and live 2 years longer. You know, what's the point is to have, you know, joy and connection. So I always, you know, I think a lot of people associate me with sort of plant-based cooking, but really my perspective is to eat things that give you pleasure. And yes, you should push yourself if you're someone who only eats like 3 or 4 foods, to be able to gain joy and pleasure from different types of things. But it doesn't mean that it has to look like a cold salad or a smoothie bowl. Like I'm someone, I like hot foods. I never have salads for lunch because that doesn't bring me joy, even though I love vegetables and healthy foods. So I think your food has to make you happy. And I think some element of preparing it needs to too, or you won't stick to it. So it doesn't need to be cooking itself, but maybe it's the shopping, maybe it's going to the farmer's market, maybe it's selecting one really specialty product or tea that you have in the morning, but you have to, you know, find some element that does make you really happy. And then maybe I'm scanning these other questions too. Maybe I can just pop in a couple other recommendations before I lob over to Julie. But one person was asking about, you know, sort of this, like the research, you know, you read green tea is good for you one day and then, oh wait, no, it's actually bad for your gut health. They're like, eggs are good for us, but no, now they're not. And, oh, the yolks are, and it's just crazy. And really it has a lot to do with how nutritional studies are designed. So for the most part, they're done based on surveys that are done significantly after the fact. So if you enroll in a nutritional study, you know, they might be telling you to eat certain things. You might just be eating what you're eating and reporting it. But you might check in with a researcher in 10 weeks and they'll be like, oh, how many eggs did you eat over this past 6 weeks? You know, and that's where a lot of the research that we read, especially sort of pop research, which I know is not what this person's talking about, but if you think about it, it's very hard to design like a true scientific study. If you wanted to find out what green tea did for gut health, you would want to have one group of people that's eating and living one exact way, another group of people that's living exactly the same way, but they're having green tea. And you just can't design that. So we kind of take what we can, especially from gut health, but I think that's why you do need to rely a lot on sort of your common sense and intuition as well. But why I'm also drawn to some of these traditional methods like fermented foods, because I think it would just be our hubris to think that we understand the microbiome. And also I really believe in cooking, because I know 40 years from now, what I think is healthy today is not going to be healthy but because I know about food and I like different things and I can prepare them, I can adjust. And I think, you know, you can kind of see people, you know, who maybe, you know, maybe even some of our parents or something, you know, it's like someone just kind of learned that 1980s low fat way of eating and just can't move on from it. So I would say they're, you know, with those studies, unfortunately, they're just not designed any particular way. And then maybe I'll just quickly answer just one more. Let's see, fruit and veggies and like supplement recommendations. So I'll stick away from supplements particularly because I think I always like to recommend for people for gut health to eat probiotic foods. So of course, kefir is obviously the number one we want you to eat. But I often recommend like fermented vegetables to people to start. I love the little spot there. So kimchi, sauerkraut, dill pickles, if you buy them in the refrigerated section, they're going to be truly fermented. And the reason we think that fermented foods are so great for us is because they have all this bacteria, you know, probiotics, which are thought to mimic the healthy bacteria in our gut. It's not like a 1-for-1. And typically they're going to be a lot more diverse than like a pill probiotic. But also when you introduce like a bacteria to a vegetable, or if you're even thinking something like sourdough bread, or there's actually so many fermented foods when you really start to think about it, those bacterias, they like pre-digest a lot of the food. So that's a lot of times why people say, oh, you know, I feel fine when I eat sourdough, but, you know, if I eat like white bread or another type of bread, I don't feel good. And we believe that it's because that bacteria can break down some sort of harmful protective compounds that plants often have, things like phytic acid that might inhibit your body absorbing some minerals. And then even just kind of breaking down really big carbohydrates into sort of smaller, easier to digest ones. So I would say start maybe with like 2 tablespoons of some kind of fermented veggie a day. And then there's obviously sort of, you know, something like kefir or yogurt, you know, is a lot of people find that a little bit easier, but I'm also just a big fan of the veggies.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
mind on the time. Julie, I'm going to give you the last word here. Is there anything else you want to add on intuition, on gut health that we didn't talk about yet?
Gosh. Well, I was going to say, you know, no, I mean, well, I was going to say, if you want to learn more, I wrote a book also, the Kefir Cookbook, and it gives you like a pretty vast, deeper dive into the history of kefir or fun stories that talk about some of these like moments where I followed my gut, or, you know, shared stories of kind of like overcoming challenging moments. There's like some stories of, I had a chance to visit Uganda with the UN Foundation, and somebody is sharing it. And I was so inspired in this refugee camp where these entrepreneurs in total scarcity, in you know, really difficult, challenging circumstances, they ran a restaurant within the camp, and it was just this entrepreneurial spirit that was so powerful to me. And the meal that we shared, you know, to your point about food bringing joy, that story is in there, and there's a recipe inspired by that moment. But, you know, the whole book is like this idea of like sharing travel from around the world. And right now we can't really travel, but what we can do is like explore food and flavor profiles through some of these stories that have already been written, and experiences that maybe we've had, or maybe just even if they're in our mind. I think, you know, like we said, the mind is so dynamic and powerful. Like we can go anywhere in our mind. Like when you read a book, like, you know, you kind of escape. And so right now we can do that. We can choose to think about it that way. And, you know, so that's kind of what I was just thinking to kind of wrap it all up. Here, I'll show you. My book is like, hold on, I'll go grab it. But
It's the book.
I keep talking, but
The Kefir Cookbook is also a wonderful collection of stories by Julie about her family too. And so it's a beautifully photographed cookbook as well, the Kefir Cookbook. Well, this has been an evening of going with your gut. We have been so delighted to have you, Julie, and you, Alia, here on this with us, and all of you watching on Facebook. Thanks for watching. All of you here in the chat, thank you for joining us. Go with your gut out there.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so great. Just really nice to spend time together, even though we're all apart. And it's really just powerful. This kind of new connection that we can establish is very special too. So thank you.
Thank you, friends. I'm going to hit end on. I'm sad already. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you.